right, the timing is right, so we may have a few more joining us, but we'll go ahead and kick off. Welcome everyone again. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to be diving in on part 3 of our 3-part webinar series on forecasting. So today is go. We've done ready and set, and today is kind of that final piece of where we go from here. In our last session set, we really focused on taking your clients' goals, financial data, and the decisions at hand for their business and using that information to set the base financial forecast that you can use with your client going forward. So in today's session, we'll be focusing on what happens after that, using what you've set up so far to guide your client toward their goals. As real life happens, things change, both expected and unexpected events actually play out in the business. So before we dive in, some quick introductions or reintroductions rather. My name is Rowan Eister. I head up marketing and partnerships for Fathom's US team. And I'm delighted to be joined once again today by Ben Cooper, who has generously shared his learnings and strategies with us throughout this series, and will be taking us through part 3 today. Ben is the owner of Amplify, a firm that specializes in growth advisory and outsourced CFO services for small businesses. And a couple more notes before we get started today. Please do not be shy about sending your questions in. It looks like we've got a little activity in the Q&A already, so keep it coming. I know as we go through things that might prompt questions, feel free to send them in as they come up. We will save some time for dedicated Q&A toward the end of our session today. But we've also got Kaylin on hand from the Fathom team to help address your questions as you send them through. So we'd love to hear from you. Keep them coming. And finally, I want to mention before we dive in, we've also decided, I know we've said it's a part 3 or a 3-parter, but we are adding part 4, kind of a bonus. We've gotten such great registration for this series and questions and engagement from you all. So we wanted to extend the offer for some more time just to pose those questions with Ben and I and have them addressed. If you have questions on the approach or philosophy, or, that one weird situation that you're in and how to handle that conversation with a client, any gaps that you need filled in from this series. We'll be hosting that on December 14th, so not next week, but the following, and you will receive a link to register for that session in our follow-up email from today's session. So within about 24 hours after our session today, you'll get an email. It'll have that registration link. It will also have links to all 3 recordings. I know many folks have asked about those, so we'll make sure you have them. And let's see, some of the great materials that Ben will share with us today. I was like, there's one more key thing in there. So look out for that. You can register there and join us for that session, but keep your questions coming today too. And from here, a quick agenda on what we will cover today. So we'll quickly recap our first 2 sessions just to kind of bring us back up to speed on what we're getting into today and some reminders of the great stuff that we've gone through. And then from there, Ben will take us back into his process and show us where he goes from here and what that looks like to move forward with your client. So first, a quick recap on our first session, Ready. So this was really about approach, strategy, mindset, the types of conversations and questions to ask your clients, and laying the foundation, really, to use our building metaphor. And then finally, we kind of landed at that success statement. Ben, to me, that was really like the key. It's the key thing you're getting in terms of foundation setting in part 1.
And we'll see that actually show up in the report. So they're just to tie it all together. So it's all three of these pieces will connect and kind of culminate in the report section today.
Awesome. And yeah, and ready, we also touched on some of those key questions. So as you're having those more personal conversations and really getting to know your client's business, where they've been, what's kind of currently on the table for them as they move forward, we went through some of those key questions. And then that leads us into bringing those questions and the building blocks of that business into actual financial information. So a lot is happening in that arrow between qualitative and quantitative. And that's really where we focused last session. And then I also wanted to call out the mindset shift. So Ben, I thought this was so valuable. I've been thinking of these little nuggets of wisdom really that you've shared with us. Do you want to just run through those 3 mindset keys, and that'll be a good way for us to reorient.
They're all kind of connected at the end of the day. Like, to me, the approach that we need to have as a guide for a business owner when we start to extrapolate, historical numbers into the future and their current decisions and all these complicated variables, and they're starting to tie together, that can be a little bit daunting. So really, to me, and we can drill into the 3 statements there if we want, but really, to me, it's about a willingness to learn and figure things out and problem solve. Because what I found is, at the end of the day, the business owners don't have the time or the same skill set to kind of bring to the forecasting process the same way that we might, just with a greater comfort in dealing with financial statements and variable expenses and all these things, and being able to tie those together in the forecasting section. I just really want to encourage everybody to, even as we dive into my specific approach, just view this as one way of doing things, and not lose sight of the opportunity to customize the picture to every client. Every business owner is different. Every business is unique. And our role is really to dig deep into the complexity and then come back out and provide a simplified picture. So it's kind of a, to sum it all up, it's, don't give up when you hit some rough patches and, you're thinking, I don't know if this number's right, or I'm afraid to ask this question because I'm not totally sure if we can answer it in the drivers, by using the drivers or scenarios, or track it with the KPIs. Or, I don't want to look dumb in front of my client. You're going to run into all these thoughts and emotions as you dive into this, but I just want to encourage everybody to just keep pushing forward. And I'll show you really what I'm excited to show today is, we started with a lot of numbers kind of being compiled in a spreadsheet, and it's not pretty to look at, but I'm going to show how pretty quickly, now that we've built things out into the driver section and everything, we can provide a really beautiful kind of snapshot of what a business is going through, and then quickly update and provide that on an ongoing basis. So it's a little bit of a journey, but don't lose heart along the way.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. And yeah, I should have flipped to this slide as you were talking, because this is exactly kind of our roadmap and where we've been. So part 1, really focusing, like we said, defining success, your flag in the distance. I think that's a great way to think about it. Where are we going? Where do we want to go? Also quantifying some of those key current decisions that the business or business owner might have at hand, and understanding where they've been, because without that knowledge, you can't really move forward in an effective way. In part 2, we really focused on taking that information and building that base forecast, and building it in a way that allows us to be dynamic. And we'll show more of that in today's session. And today we'll dive in on part 5 of this roadmap. So creating that dynamism is a word I keep coming back to, being able to recalibrate. Yeah, there's a lot of power in that. So yeah, as you go, real things happen, or goals might shift, or, life comes into play. So what happens then? So super excited to dive in from here.
Absolutely.
And yeah, just a quick summary of what we will be covering within that step 5 today, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Ben will be taking us through drivers, micro forecasts, and scenarios, and how those moving pieces within Fathom kind of click into each other and allow for a super dynamic forecasting experience, both for you and your client. And then we'll go into reporting. So this is kind of in many ways, you'll see, and Ben has a great way of thinking about this, but your toolkit for what are the key pieces that I want my client to really engage with and understand, and how to think about reports is your tool for that. And yeah, where that kind of comes in, maybe that's the map in our analogy, but using that as a guide for your client. So that's where we'll kind of wrap today and then come back for Q&A.
Perfect.
So Ben, I'll let you take it from here.
Can we go to the next slide actually before we jump in? Because
Yes.
the metaphor here that that as Rowan and I have been preparing for today, that it's just become clear how powerful a metaphor it is to think of the forecast and kind of a report really as almost like a GPS for the business, to kind of view where you're at along a journey. The ready, set, go is kind of like, in the ready section, we kind of say, hey, here's the destination. Here's where we want to end up. So that's kind of the flag in the distance. And it includes things like where you currently are right now, and kind of, some of the finer details of, how your business is kind of tied together and how it functions. And then in the set piece, really it's kind of, tying all of those individual pieces together in a way that allows us then to go on the journey. So it's almost like the qualitative arrow, quantitative picture. It's ready, set, go. And at the end of the day, the best metaphor I can think of when it comes to being able to show a report to a client, and I want to give everybody, I want to invite everybody to kind of put yourselves in the shoes of your client as I switch over here into Fathom, because what I want you to imagine is, you have been, just overwhelmed in maybe your day-to-day business. You're kind of digging through emails and you're just in the weeds, right? So as a business owner, you got a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of noise. And then, hey, it's time for the meeting with, the guide here. It's time to have my Fathom check-in. And so imagine coming out of just the messiness of running the business, and it's almost kind of to carry the GPS metaphor. It's kind of like, I don't know what road I'm on right now, and I'm kind of wandering. I don't even know if I'm on a road right now, kind of all over the place. Am I on track? I had a conversation with somebody who's in the financial advisory world earlier this week, and he made the comment that the main question that's always in the client's head is, am I okay? Like, am I doing all right? Is everything, are we on a good track? And so to be able to, and this is where I'll invite you to kind of put I think you need to stop sharing, Rowan, before I can share my screen, but put yourself in the shoes of the business owner, and imagine showing up to see, oh, okay, yes, here is, and I'm going to scroll through this relatively quickly, but I want to show kind of how where we're going to kind of culminate our conversation today. And a lot of the underlying movements of driver changes and scenarios and the micro forecast, all of them end up being represented and reflected here in the report section. So we're going to start here, and I'll just give you this sense of, oh, it's refreshing to just kind of come out of the craziness and view something that is simple, when I've been dealing with complications all day. And so, I'm not going to dig into every statement here or every section here. We will in a moment, but, just put yourself in the shoes of the business owner. There's just you're coming out of chaos, and, okay, and I love this picture, even as a parallel of the GPS. It kind of is showing paths forward, and how, ultimately different decisions can lead us to different destinations, or lead us to some of our targets or goals sooner than if we made different decisions. And so we'll dig into that here further. But what I want you to just kind of put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's going, oh, this is a relief. Are we doing okay? Are we on track? Are we looking at the right things? It gives me confidence imagining, the position of the business owner. And so also what I want to do is contrast this this picture in this report that we can put together. And I believe everybody's going to be able to get access to this report. So you'll be able to read through it in more detail. But remember where we started. So at the beginning of the first segment here in this 3-part series, we started by just gathering all these random bits of information, and it's a little bit chaotic. And then the second segment, we're drilling into how these might be tied together, and it's just a lot of noise. And it's and this is where I'm encouraging you to not give up in these kinds of steps along the way, because once we do get it built out, these same sections that we have paralleling, like we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, they're reflected here, same values, same formulas, we built them out. What that's allowing us to do is go from this, which isn't pretty to look at necessarily, to this. And it's not only much prettier to look at, but it's also connected up with the live accounting information. So it's constantly being updated. And just like a GPS, it's giving us, okay, from your current spot now, same destination, maybe there's been an accident, there's traffic, there's road closures, and so it parallels so much the experience of the business owner. And I just love that metaphor. So let's dig in here to the driver section. And I know there was one question about why is it important to build out some of these formulas in the driver section instead of just insert the variables directly in like the profit and loss. So for instance, the revenue for one of the revenue streams, we just are referencing a driver line that is populated down here. The reason I find it so important to have it structured this way is because not just for you as the person building it, but also for the client, if they ever want to access this and get in and see kind of what's going on, how are things structured, instead of having something like, okay, revenue this month is, like, we can see the formula here in the driver section. We see it's the number of units sold this month times the revenue per unit, and that gets us this total revenue picture. If we had as a value rule or as a formula in the profit and loss line itself, that we had 6,656 times 4.59. It's hard to really understand what's going on there. And especially, as we'll see in a moment, especially as we begin to consider different decisions about a price change, for instance, it's much cleaner to have it set up in a way that we can change scenarios and then see these numbers change. And also understand, what I love about the way the formulas are set up is it names the variable that's being included in the formula. It's not like Excel where it's, okay, where's a F74? Where's that? Like, what is going on there? So what I love about this is it allows us for a lot of flexibility when it comes to creating scenarios and making adjustments. Now, also, one other thing I want to mention is, if you do forget, where you've changed things or what the timing of some adjustments have been, there is a handy audit that you can come in and download and just see, okay, over time, here's where I made that change, here's this assumption. So that's helpful to be aware of as well. So I showed you in the driver section, or in the report section, that this kind of roadmap. It's like, well, how do we get there? Like, I see we have the blue line, which is, in this scenario, it's the blue dotted line, and in all three of these graphs, that represents our main forecast. The way we get there is, and then end up having the one that is with the improvements made, which is the better scenario, and then the worst case scenario. The way we get there is by going into the forecasting section again and creating scenarios off of the main. And so once we built the main scenario, we can come in here and we can create a scenario. The nice thing is we can title it whatever we want, and we can duplicate it using the main forecast, for instance. And that's so essentially all I did to get a better and worse scenario was duplicate the main, and then based on the feedback of the client, and I'll just highlight this this table right here. These are the assumptions that really drive the better and worse scenarios. So it's, if you just think of it, it's, you know, all the same revenue and cost of goods and all those same assumptions tied together, but we duplicate it and then we just tweak a couple things. And like I mentioned previously, one of the main things that can be tweaked, or that there's an opportunity that the business owner is considering here, is increasing price by $1 a unit. There's also the opportunity to switch suppliers. And so if you see here in the driver assumptions listed out, these are a couple improvements that as we create that better scenario, we can adjust those driver values and begin to see how that plays out now. So that's an alternate path. And the reason that's so important is we want to, I mentioned imagination is the bottleneck. This is one of those things that may be really time consuming and difficult to accomplish quickly in Excel or Google Sheets, but it's something that we can very quickly come in, choose the better case scenario. And I've already made these adjustments, but if you direct your eyes here first to the revenue per unit section, when I click better case, you'll see those increase by $1 per. So now that we have a better case and we've made that adjustment, immediately what we should see, because we tied these together, is we should see that the revenue should go up compared to the normal main forecast. So if I exit out of this, we'll see the revenue goes down in correlation. So we know that the formulas are working correctly. Another variable that we know was available for the business owner to consider was an improvement in the cost of goods. So the material cost, if we switch suppliers, somebody's offering, originally it was a 3 cents per ounce discount, but just heard from the business owner that it's only 2 cents per ounce. So they're kind of unsure if it's worth the shift or if they should move. But what we want to do is still include that as part of this scenario. We want to go from what was 14 cents an ounce down to 12 cents an ounce. And in doing so, again, I'll just toggle back to the main scenario. We should see that the cost of goods actually improves, and it does. So it with these two improvements that we see being available for a better scenario, a better case outcome for the business, we can see that an increase in price and a reduction in cost of goods, both of those help improve the margins and profitability for the business. So as we look here at the yellow line, that's what's causing the revenue, specifically in this graph, that's what's causing it to leap up above the main forecast. Now, also, you know, and this could be based on the business owner's feedback, or it could just be, well, we also want to show realistically how could things be not so rosy in the future. And so we see here that a couple adjustments that could be made that create a less optimistic future picture from a revenue standpoint and profitability standpoint. And so the adjustments that are made here are actually on the year-over-year growth variables that we have set up. And so if you look in this section, the annual increases, when I click over to the worst case scenario, then it's going to change both the year-over-year revenue growth to 0% and the cost of goods, instead of just a 4% annual increase, we're saying, actually, you know, the material's going up. We're not saving 2 cents an ounce anymore. It's actually getting more expensive to produce the hot sauce. So those two shifts allow us to now create the lower boundary. So in some ways, what we're kind of creating for the business owner is, here's the middle of the road. Here's the left bumper. Here's the right bumper. Here's kind of, right, as we're traveling forward, you know, it's not just, we don't have to view the future as some ambiguous region of darkness that doesn't have boundaries on it. We can kind of say, look, and this is part of what creates a little peace of mind for a business owner. They can see, oh, even if revenue doesn't grow year over year, and if our cost of goods go up, oh, we're still generating revenue. Okay, like,
yeah,
I don't
we're
have to.
still shooting to that flag in the distance.
Yeah,
We're making our way there.
yeah, and I don't know what that means for if I can hire a manager or when that might work, but once we create those adjustments, then we can view how the forecast plays out with those driver changes, and specifically the place that we can look, because we know that it's important for the business owner to be able to hire a manager, for instance. One place that we can also see the impact from the scenario standpoint is here in the roadmap. So in this case, we've set that we want to be hovering, we want to be hitting $10,000 in operating profit a month to justify, the new hire. So we want to be consistently at that point. And we know that as we drag this around, it kind of fluctuates a little bit, but we can see based on the current forecast and kind of where things are sitting today, that that it looks like September would be when we can hire that person. Now we also then can click over to the better case scenario and look down here. The green is hitting immediately, so we know that if somehow it were possible for the business owner to implement these changes and improve the margin that drastically, there's a great opportunity to move forward more quickly with, and that's the important thing here with the roadmap. Just again, to carry out the GPS analogy there, but the roadmap really allows us to view the scenarios and the timing of certain decisions and sequencing them accordingly based on the outcomes from these different scenarios and how they play out. Does that all make sense? Okay. One other thing that I want to highlight here as we're in the driver section is that we also got feedback from the client, and this can happen just as a random email that you get from somebody like, oh, by the way, we launched the subscription model. We thought it was going to be $5 an acquisition, but it turns out it's been more expensive. So what's important is that, because of how we have this set up, we need to have an awareness of what kind of the baseline number of existing subscribers is. So it can be helpful to receive that, okay, well, what's it been each month? And $8.57, $9.15, $7.11. What's churn been like? How much have we lost each month? They can provide that information as well. We know that those are two keys around a subscription model that we want to pay attention to. So as we enter these, it allows us to make sure that things are continuing to play out from a realistic point, as opposed to well, we thought it was 5 and it's been in the model the whole way, and it's thinking that we have way more subscribers than we actually do. So it's important to monitor and just pay attention to which drivers you think need to be changed or updated, based on new information. And so the one other note I want to make while we're in the driver section, and then we'll go over to the report and walk through that, is that as we make changes, the way I showed you this, oh, that's really slick. How are we highlighting some of these assumptions? The way we're doing that is when we make an adjustment and when we create a value rule or edit an existing rule, there's an option down here to take notes and then also include in the assumptions report. And so I found that to be really helpful to just for people to say, so what's different about the better and worse compared to the main forecast? So, and that's actually something that we can include, down here underneath the different scenarios. So I'm going to quickly now go through the structure, and we're going to kind of fly through this, but I know you'll be able to access a copy of this. So, so feel free to explore it in more detail on your own. But what I find to be really helpful is to anchor the conversation and bring it back to like, here's the destination. So same success statement that we kind of focused on in the first conversations. Here are the key decisions that we know are top of their mind. And the reason this is so helpful, and I include even a snapshot of the roadmap at the beginning, is because if they don't know that this is connected to what they care about, they might not be listening, to be honest. I mean, they may have so many things going on in their head that it's just impossible for them to pay attention. And so what this does is it kind of objectively cuts through the noise, and it helps people refocus and go, oh yeah, I know there's a lot of urgent things all over the place in my business right now, but this is what I care about most. And actually hiring a manager would help with all these other things too. So what can we do to move the needle and get to that destination as soon as possible? So I like starting with an introduction that really kind of anchors and sets their sights on what's important. I find it helpful to do a quick review of previous period. Could be a quarter, could be a month. I chose a really ugly color. I know, but the point is, don't be afraid to customize things to your client. It's a small, simple thing, but I find it to, again, just make it feel like these are my numbers. This is my business. So I chose a hot sauce color, and it's really ugly, but it's those simple things that make them feel like this is tailored and customized. So just a quick performance review, and some of these reports are just drag and drop off the out of the template section. So definitely explore everything that's available over there. So this is kind of zoomed in, like, okay, where are we at? And if you think, again, GPS, you pinch and, zoom out on a phone. That's kind of what's going on from this statement. And the same highlighted section is reflected here, but it's in a 12-month view. So you're kind of zooming out and seeing like, okay, is there any red up ahead? Are there any accidents up ahead here? Anything that we want to navigate around? So this is another helpful thing to just, kind of see in context of where we've been, where we're at in the calendar year. For instance, you can change the time frames of, to whatever is applicable to your client. And then to me, this is the most fun section, because it looks like it feels like we're playing a game, like in a good way. It just feels like there's opportunity, and there's ways that we can influence the journey. Like we're not just kind of victims to what's happening to us, or we don't just have to repeat what's happened last month or the month before. We have the ability to kind of steer this thing. And so that's what I get excited about. The flow here that I like is, here's where we're going. Here's kind of where we have been. Now let's zoom out. Here's where we've been and a stretch of where we're heading, right? And these are all currently set to just show a main forecast. And then the blue line is, again, telling that same story, but now including a couple different scenarios. So, and here's where we could be going. That's kind of the next section here. One thing that I found helpful is, if I create a scenario comparison and look at different revenues, what I found to be quick, if I format it and I like the colors and I want them to be consistent, as I don't just look at revenue, but also like operating profit or cash on hand, what I find to be really helpful is to just actually go in here and duplicate this, come in, it's got the same arrangement with colors and everything, and then come in here and edit the metric and just choose something else. Choose something else that you want to be looking at. These are all there's so many things that you can track. It's incredible, but also overwhelming if we're not careful. So it's like, the reality is we actually want to be sensitive to not overwhelm and just create a different type of complexity for the business owner. So you'll see that there are, there's a good number of visuals and graphs here and tables, but there's not too many. Like, we can walk through all this in one single meeting. They can take it. There's more to drill into. It's more important that they can track with where they're at and then, kind of land in an action spot. So you'll see the tail end of this report is kind of ending in a summary, and then what are the action steps? So what are we going to do based on what we just knowing what we know now, what are we going to do about it? Like that's ultimately what, if we want to sum up a single kind of check-in GPS, how are we doing client meeting, knowing what we know now, what are we going to do? Like that really sums it up. The
Right.
the next section here, and this I'm landing the plane. Rowan's looking at the clock like, oh no, here we
You're
go.
fine. You're fine.
But the final section here is KPI tracking, and the reason I find this to be really helpful is there are too many numbers that a business owner could pay attention to, and so I find that this is where we can really offer a ton of value and in simplifying, all the things you could be tracking, but which ones actually move the needle. So this top one is tied to the hiring decision. It should look really familiar. These are operating profit. That dotted line is right at the $10,000 mark. We're just trying to see when are we consistently beating it. And then these two bottom ones are tied to the subscription setup. And we're looking at, oh yeah, you're right. We thought that our target here was $5 per acquisition, but you're right. It has been high. Thankfully, churn has been a little bit lower, but we got to keep monitoring that. So these are the important things that we can kind of keep an eye on. Now, the business owner at this point could say, hey, could we also add this metric? And this is what, like, because we've set things up the way we have, it's, come in here, click the KPIs and go to town. Like there are a lot of things here. There's the ability in the settings section to create your own KPIs. There are a lot, we're not even showing all of them right here, but there are tons in here. You can just get super creative. And this is part of the resourceful area. But quickly, the number 5 is where I set those targets, like the $5, the subscription churn, 20%, like those types of things. Operating profit, $10,000. Like this is where these dotted lines are being derived from. But then, we've kind of highlighted the things that we want to be tracking, and then we can kind of land the conversation and, here's a summary. So just a reminder, these are kind of like the talking notes that you might have in the meeting. And so you can read through those, you can identify then, and during the conversation, you might be scrolling down and saying, okay, here are the next steps where, oh yeah, we need to add that to the next steps. So what you can end up with is a report that's really kind of a summary of March 2023. Here's, reviewing where that month ended up and where we're heading. Practical one, like I highlighted, oh man, the acquisition cost is higher than we expected. Well, hey, a good next step would be, hey, ask the marketing agency what they expect the next 3 months to be. How should we update our drivers so that we're more closely matching a reality that you expect? And when we make those adjustments, it just builds trust from the business owner. It gives them a greater level of confidence that we're not just painting some picture that's not rooted in reality. We're kind of constantly taking the information they're feeding us, and this is a cycle. I mean, this is constantly, I think the word is recalibrating on the GPS, right? So we're constantly actually going back through this cycle, and I'll stop sharing so Rowan, you can go back to that visual. But we're constantly coming back to this journey in these kind of 5 steps where it's okay to go back to step number 2. And I say step number 2 because that's where we're trying to track the key decisions, like today's decisions that a business owner is thinking about. Well, when you build the original forecast, and you might save that forecast as a budget, and you can check out the help articles to figure that out. But when you set the original forecast and driver values and the scenarios and micro forecast, roadmap, all that stuff, it's all based on what was known at that time. And so the fact that things have to get recalibrated is not a bad thing. It just means that we're learning more. We're refining things like acquisition costs. It's just every month it gets a little bit more accurate, and hopefully the client gets a little bit more excited through the conversations and looks forward to the conversations. So Hopefully that sums up a little bit of how all these things, yeah, it's like we start with a simplified question of how do you know, what's success look like for you as a business owner? That's like such a big question to ask, but then we can end up with like we go into the weeds, we build out everything, we come back out with something that is like that GPS on the dashboard of your car.
Right. Yes, I love the way that you describe that. And I know we've gotten a few questions throughout the series about, you know, why would I build this in such a detailed way if I could do it in a simpler way, or a way that's a little more plug and play? And I think this is a great example of exactly why. It allows you to not be afraid to explore those what ifs and the changes that may actually come or be considered in the future for that business. Whereas if you built it all to be pretty, you know, templated or plug and play and ready to go, it's a lot harder and probably scarier to even have your client ask those questions, because then going back and changing it might be a big daunting thing. But yeah, like you said, zooming in and getting into the weeds with all of the details of those drivers and just the financial details and value rules and all of that, it pays off once you move forward with the client and they start engaging and things start happening in the business. Like you said, you know, your forecast may have been set 6 months ago, and those qualifying questions may have been asked 6 months ago, and then life happens and they get new information, more information, new decisions are on the table. So yeah, I love that idea of you're that guide. You're going into the weeds and you're using the report. I love the way you mentioned this to me, Ben. You think of the report as kind of your filter. Like I've got all of this detailed information that I've plugged in here and sorted out for them. But now what am I filtering back up to the client, and what do I want them to really engage with?
Totally.
I think that is a great place to kick off our Q&A.
I'll add one more thing. I'm sorry, but if anybody's ever had to in a spreadsheet form, like there are certain things you can do in Excel that you can't do in Fathom, right? Just from the driver's, they're just different trade-offs. But there is no function that I've found to like anything close to the fact that it connects up to QuickBooks or Xero or whatever accounting software, and I don't have to manually go in and make the forecast relevant again. That's the biggest burden. So yeah, you might end up being able to do some pretty exciting things, but that, you know, as time goes on, your massive Excel spreadsheet becomes burdensome. It's not dynamic. It's like printing off a map in the car, right? And taking that with you, as opposed to having the GPS. And they're two very different things. So, and importantly, you know, the way the reports are set up, it's once you build this out, there's a lot of work on the front end to build out a forecast, but then you're just monitoring and refining. And so as the client relationship continues over time, you're not having to rebuild or re-update necessarily at all in the same way that you start out. And that I've just gotten so much positive feedback from the quality of the reporting, not just from clients. So the reality is it makes you look good as the guide. It makes the business owner look good to their investors or their bank relationships. You know, it makes those folks look good to their peers, like, because these reports, even if it's the same numbers that you would deliver to somebody in a spreadsheet, there's something, and I've heard this from a number of people, there's something different about seeing the same numbers reflected here in whether it's a PDF or a live Fathom report. It's more believable, it's more exciting, it just looks more professional. So anyway, final thought.
Yeah, just the visual translation. I've heard that feedback too, of course, over the years from advisors and their clients. Just coloring something in can make a difference.
Right.
Your eye goes right there. And like we were talking about, that busy business owner who's in the chaos, they're in the muck of their business day to day. they're dealing with a lot coming at them. And then to be able to zoom out and then also have you guide them, here's exactly what we're going to dig into. Yep. And the visual of what it looks like, so they can kind of have that instant download moment, or better yet, that aha, this looks amazing moment. Yep. Where they're processing that. I want to kick off with a question along those lines. So I've heard many different approaches for sharing reports. I'm curious what your process looks like, Ben, when you're sharing a report with a client. Are you sending the report before the meeting so they can kind of digest before you meet? Are you interacting with them? And like you mentioned, you might be changing things as you are working through it together. What kind of format do you use for that?
Yeah, I prefer, so just big picture, I love that there's a scheduling feature and functionality, but I would encourage everybody to not set that up until you're really in the flow and for sure the books are going to be closed out by a certain time, all those things. So I found it to be most helpful to maybe reach out if needed, or just have that understanding with the client that, I got an email earlier today with some, a client saying, hey, this number, I'm thinking about charging this for this event in August, because it's a variable that affects the overall picture. I like being able to gather those updates and then walk through, like the report actually is almost like you have slides here for this webinar. It's kind of like the slide deck for our conversation. So it is kind of the agenda, it's the outline. We can put notes in there. And I find that to be most helpful for me to kind of guide the conversation through showing the visuals. And again, because I want to be filtering, I want to kind of be blocking, I kind of picture like, I'm kind of like blocking the door from letting too many things come into the room while we're talking. Like I'm trying to keep our focus. And so I see my role as kind of being, just kind of moderating, but yeah, it's kind of like I'm almost moderating between the business owner and their numbers, if that makes sense. It's kind of a weird way to think. I've never thought of it that way, but I'm kind of helping make sure that relationship is working as well as it possibly can.
Right. Yeah, and they can stay functional and not be deep in every single number. They've got you to guide them.
Yeah, and who's steering, which party is steering which? Because I have found, and I see this even in, I had a business owner come to me last week, and even in the way that he had built out his initial forecast was reflective of, and it was reflective of him not feeling like he was in control of what's happening in his business. So, something like digital marketing and advertising spend, he was viewing as a percent of revenue in future months, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to spend $1 on Facebook ads or Google ads, but there's going to be a return on that ad spend. So that's a driver, right? So that's actually before revenue, not a percent of revenue that follows, right? So even the way that to me, that was symptomatic of the numbers are winning, like the right. Chaos of like, I don't know how this whole ship is moving and I don't know how to steer it. Like that to me is what's so important is we can kind of put things back in proper order and sequence, and then just aim it all at that first conversation where a business owner is saying, this is what I care about. Like, and I don't know how to get there. Like there's such a tenderness to that and a vulnerability that I think if we can approach those conversations first, like on a human to human level, it's so important, because it actually then unlocks, it makes this conversation, when you're really just mostly talking about numbers and you're in the quantitative phase, it's what makes it meaningful. It's what makes somebody pay attention to it. Because otherwise they're just going to go, oh yeah, I've heard, this venture capitalist told me I should be getting this, this percent, whatever. Like there's just so many ways that people can kind of default fall into a definition of success, or I'm supposed to track these 17 KPIs. It's like, okay, who
Right.
told you
What's the
why? Like,
meaning? Yeah.
why?
Meaning of that.
There's usually not a great reason for it, except they saw a blog post somewhere or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and that's a powerful, it's kind of giving them power too. It's like I'm showing you how these pieces click into each other so that you can take power over them and not the numbers kind of taking power over you and you're just hanging on for the ride.
Yes.
We got a good question along those lines. I think this probably is applicable for a few people in the audience. Just thinking of, they said, what kind of forecast should be initially presented to startup companies and their owners so that they won't be overwhelmed? So you've touched on this a bit, I think, more broadly, maybe not just startup companies, but yeah, going through that process of moderating or kind of curating which pieces you show them. Any tips for like a simple, not overwhelming place to start? This person asked, should it be P&L, cash flow, and KPIs only, or any other suggestions?
It's a great question. And it probably depends. Like in the frustrating answer that the frustrating answer is it depends on the business owner's ability to not get distracted. And what I mean by that is there's a certain amount, and even within like the P&L table that you can drop into the report section, you can go in and show different levels of detail. So you can like an accordion, it just can expand out and you can see. So probably not the hyper detailed statements. It depends on the stage. This is the challenge where I'm going, yeah, every business owner is different. Every business is different. So there's some discretion there where you really have to filter. For some business owners, I would feel comfortable showing them whatever level of detail because they don't get lost in the numbers. But other clients, I would just show like the most simplified, kind of not, if you remember in my report, there's the P&L performance review was kind of an unpacked category level, some detail. But then the forecast was actually a compressed, like the P&L was actually just down to 7 or 8 lines. And so some business owners maybe just need to see that hyper compressed picture. If you're concerned about them getting lost and getting like hyper focused on the wrong metrics, try to eliminate some of those. So there's a little bit of like, that's why I like being like them seeing it in the conversation, because I can keep things on track as we're looking at the numbers, and they can say, well, what's going on underneath those numbers? Then we can expand it and we can look at it together, because I just don't want them to get distracted, I guess. Because at the end of the day, like I mentioned, and the way this is all structured is to get them to an actionable place where, they don't just sit and linger in the numbers forever. They're looking at this and saying, what's valuable here? And Fathom is really like, the reports are really set up to have a new glimpse at what's going on a monthly rhythm. And so, the reality is they're not going to be in here on a daily level saying, why is this number this? It's so. I also don't give the same level of access to every client. It's not necessary sometimes, and I just want to make sure that I'm freeing them up to focus on what matters. So if they really want to know all the numbers, don't be afraid to give them full access. Like but it's just a matter of your sense of how distracted they could get in kind of digging into the weeds. So there's just a whole spectrum of like people's comfort level with that. So
yeah, and I think sussing that out, it's kind of like that moderating or curating, even like you're working as the filter that's deciding what is presented to them. And I imagine with a new client, like if you were just trying this with a new client that you've signed on, I think also one of the things that you've said to me just in our conversations and going through this series has been being open to asking what is not useful for them, which, might be a new or somewhat scary or uncomfortable thing to put out there, but showing them a report, maybe they've asked for numbers in a fairly in-depth way. So you've given that to them and then coming back and saying, yeah, what part of this can we scrap or, really wasn't helpful for this review?
Exactly.
And filtering from there. And I imagine it probably goes both ways. Like if you've given them really summarized high level info, also saying, would you like to get deeper in here? Is there more that I can present?
Exactly. So, totally. Yeah. And so I would err on the side of showing less, I guess, just because I've seen eyes glaze over when there's too much on the page and they're kind of like, where do I look? What's going on here?
Right.
So I find it helpful to start, and that's why I kind of start with showing like, here's the roadmap scenarios. Like this is the general picture. Now let's zoom into it and we can get hyper granular, but let's just ease our way into that. Because ultimately what we're trying to understand is how today's decisions either positively or negatively affect the overall picture, right? Because you're kind of saying, okay, well, what does that mean about this decision I'm facing? Like, again, so it's like the two ends of that make it matter to somebody is that we start with, oh, this is heading toward what I like. Okay, this gets me out of like the cloud of chaos that my head might be in. And then it ends back in where we are right now, today. Here are the action steps. This is what we can do to know that we are making progress toward that scenario that we like. It's the one that gets us, and we're tracking the KPI that it gets us to that manager hiring, specifically in this scenario.
Right. I love that. Well, we've gotten a handful of great questions. Thank you all. And I know we're over time. We always want to chat longer with you guys and really appreciate you engaging with us and sending your questions in. I believe we've gotten to them all. Thank you, Kaylin. If we didn't get to your question, we'll follow up with you after this webinar with an email and more information on it. I do want to plug again our next session, the bonus Q&A session. So there's a lot to take in between all three parts of our series. We'll be sending out the recordings to all three so that you can rewatch the first one, or if you missed anything, you can go back and kind of review. They all fit together in that nice order. But other questions that you have, philosophical, strategic, from Ben's learnings and scenarios he's been in with clients and actually putting this into practice, we'd love to hear them. So come to us with your questions. We'd love for you to join us on the 14th, and we'll take those live and chat with you then. So once again, we'll follow up recordings. You'll also get a registration link. Please look out in your spam folders. I've seen some questions around, I don't think I got the recording. We did send it out to all registrants, so they may be going to spam. Just keep an eye out. Let us know if you don't get those materials. We'll make sure that they get to you. But thank you once again, everyone, for joining us today and through our series. This has been a lot of fun and super valuable. I feel like I'm ready to go. I'm fired up. It's been a great journey. We hope it's been just as useful and engaging for you. And thank you so much, Ben, for sharing this with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for everybody who spent time attending, and show up at the next one and we can talk more off script maybe.
Perfect. Looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.